We had a dance hall in our town called the Queen's Hall, and it was really a great place to go. Um, we had in our town a place called the Palace Barracks, and it was all English soldiers who were in there. And my mother and father said that I was not allowed to go to the Queen's Hall because they were all English soldiers and that, but it was so exciting. And my girlfriends and I used to go anyway. And but there used to be fights nearly every Saturday night because the local guys didn't like the English soldiers, so there was always a big fight. But when you're like 15 and 16, 17, you thought that was just great, to watch all this excitement. And then there was also a dance hall in Belfast. There was two. I mean, actually, it was more than two, but I went to one called the Club Orchid. And that was a great place. It was ballroom dancing. And when the latest dances came out, that's where we all went to learn the dances. And the Plaza, which was open every night of the week, practically. So we used to go between the two. So between all the dance halls, I was out dancing 4 to 5 times a week.
Can you remember any of the bands, the big names?
The one was the Royal Show Band. I remember the Royal Show Band. But I don't remember the other bands. But they used to have amateur nights where everybody would get up and try to sing or whatever. And some were really good. And then we used to take bus trips around on a Sunday, take a bus and go somewhere up to Donegal, and we used to go to the Glens of Antrim and go through all that. So we were busy. We had a lot of stuff to do.
Was the church an important part of your community?
It was. Yeah. It was very important. It was just something that you just did. It wasn't that there was a question, or you just went to church because it was part of your life, an extension of your life. You just went. And in the church, if you talked, you talked, somebody behind you would tap your shoulder and tell you to be quiet. It was as if everybody in the community were your parents. It was, and I also took Irish step dancing with the school. We had a little parish hall, and we took our Irish step dancing there, and we did that when I was younger, maybe twice a week, Tuesday and Thursdays. And then my father would turn the radio on one night a week from Radio Éireann, and we would practice our dancing at home. So we did that. But the school was, and the church did play a big part in our lives. Your parents were always into they were either picking up the collection or they were working on some kind of a program. My father always worked on the fish. We always had a fish. He always worked on the fish. And so I think that, and we would go up to the church if we had something going on that we needed prayers for, and put the money in the little box for novenas and all that.
I got to ask you one question, coming from Northern Ireland,
yeah,
and being Catholic in Northern Ireland. What did the 12th of July mean to you? What was the 12th of July?
Well, when I was growing up, the 12th of July didn't mean anything, really. We used to go to when they had the fireworks, and they had the bonfires. We used to go there because our friends went.
Yeah.
And we went there, and it really wasn't a big problem in our small town.
Sure.
It didn't mean, I never even knew what it meant growing up.
Did you find, as you were a teenager now going to the dances in Belfast, that there was less of a barrier there between the Protestant and Catholic children?
Well, the Club Orchid was basically Catholic. The Queen's Hall was everybody. Yes. Everybody went there. It didn't matter. But you were always aware that you could not date anybody who was out of your religion, because it was just too many problems. Yeah. Once you started, then you might go out a couple of times, but then you would just have to stop.
Before you left Ireland, did your grandparents pass away during your time living there?
Yeah, my grandmother passed away before I left. My grandfather was still living when I left.
What's your memories of and death in general, the way flowers, and how was that?
Well, you could always go in to see them. You know, their houses were always open if somebody died. I remember when my grandmother died, they all were buried from their house. They were always on their bed. And I remember all the mass cards were always around them, and the flowers in the room. And all the mirrors were always covered. The mirrors were always covered in the homes. And there was always somebody there with the person all the time. You had in the kitchen they would have tea and drinks or whatever, and then you'd sit in the bedroom with they were usually in the bedroom, and you sit there and just chat and talk, and
The wake was at the house.
yeah, it was always at the house. Yeah, my grandmothers, my grandfathers was always at the house, and my parents were actually buried from our home, from their home.
Yeah, and pretty much continues the same today, except in some areas they have funeral homes now.
Yeah, they do have funeral homes, or they will prepare them they will take them from their home to the funeral parlor.
Yeah.
But
well, there came a time when you made up your mind to leave Hollywood.
yes.
And,
Well, I had when I was young, 8 or 9 years of age, I can't remember. I remember my parents got a postcard from Miami, and it was all palm trees, and it looked beautiful, and that stuck in my head. And I had thought about moving many times, and I was going to go to England, and my parents didn't really want me to go to England. So a girl I worked with in Woolworths said that she was going to America, and I said, well, how are you doing that? And she said, well, there's this agency, and they have jobs for nannies, and you can go out to America and take care of kids, and they'll pay your fare to go out, and they will sponsor you for a year, and then you can do whatever you want after that. So I thought about it for a while, and one day I just decided to go down to the agency. And they said, yeah, they had applications. I filled them in. I went and got my passport, thinking I'm going to go sometime, you know. But in about 3 months, they had everything ready. And the hardest part was telling my parents that I was leaving. That was the hardest part. I was the oldest, and
you hadn't really
But
discussed this before.
I had told them that I may, you know, I was thinking of going to England, or I was thinking of going to America. Australia was too far. Too far. Yeah. And so I guess they didn't think I would really go, and I didn't think I would really go. You know, it's like a dream; you might do it, but when the time came, I decided that I would go, and I arrived.
You left Hollywood. Where did you come out of from? Did you fly out here?
I flew out from my father drove us down from Hollywood to Dublin, and I flew from Dublin to New York, and I went for LL Airlines was the airlines that I went because they had the people that I were going to work for had paid the ticket for us to go, and that was the airline that I was going on. And I remember I spilt my coffee on my tea on my x-rays, because you had to carry all your x-rays with you and everything with you. And I was thinking, oh, they're never going to let me in. I was panicking. They're never going to let me in now. I don't have any x-rays. And I was on the plane by myself, and you know, thinking, and I started to talk to this girl beside me, and she was going out for the same thing. But she was going to California. And so I arrived, and it actually was on Memorial Day that I arrived. And it was a warm day, and the gentleman that I was going to take care of his kids, he picked me up in New York. And I thought, wow, how hot it was. It was a very hot day. And then I came to their home, and I met, they had 4 children. And at first it was you know, when of course they write and tell you you're going to have this big room with a television and all this stuff, and actually it wasn't anything that I had thought it would have been like. And I came to Connecticut, Norwalk, Connecticut, and they said it was an hour from New York. So, because actually I had wanted to go to New York, but I ended up in Connecticut, and it was fine. It was very difficult as far as a social life. That's what I really missed, because I couldn't drive for one thing, and we were out in the country. And if I wanted to go somewhere, they had to take me, and then I had to get a taxi home. So as far after been dancing, 4 or 5 times a week, and then coming and not having any dances to go to, it was really hard for the first few months. Then I met 3 other girls in the neighborhood who were doing the same kind of job. Maureen, my girlfriend, was from England. May was from Scotland, and Ina was from Scotland. So we clicked together, and in fact, I'm still friends with them to this day. And then we started to go to New York on our day off. And then in the summer, they went up to Nantucket. The people went up to Nantucket Island, and that was the worst part of my, at the beginning when I came out, because they went up there for June and July. And I didn't, July and August, and they were right out on the water, which to get into town, it was quite a hike. So that was very lonely time. My father used to write to me every week. I got a letter from him every week, and that really kept me going. So I thought, I don't like this country, I don't like it. I'm going to finish my year, then I'm going home. But we came back from Nantucket, and then I started to have a more social life, get to know more people, and I worked there for a year and a half, and then I went back to Ireland thinking I might stay. But once I got home, after I was there a while, I thought, I'm going back. So I came back, and then I got a job at the telephone company. And I worked there for 31 years.
Wow. When you came first, what year? That was 1960, was it? Or?
1962.
1962?
Yeah.
Okay. And so then you went back a year later, a year and a half later, you came back to America, and then you got a job and worked at the telephone company.
You're right.
That was quite a story, coming over at that time and not knowing exactly who you were coming to. Tell us a little bit about the family.
He worked in New York. He was a publisher, and their name was O'Neill, and she worked. She stayed home. She did a lot of volunteer work, and they had 4 kids that I took care of. The baby was only a couple of years old. A couple of years old, and I thought their kids were spoiled. That's what I thought about American kids when I first came out, because I would never, growing up, you were taught never to talk back or respect your elders and all that, and I thought that wasn't the way it was. If you told them to do something, you'd have to tell them a couple of times. And I remember the older girl, one time I had told her to help me change the little boy's shoes because I was doing something else, and she said, well, you're our maid, so you do it. I was like, oh, yeah. So I went down and told the mother, and of course she did punish her for speaking like that. But that was the kind of attitude that I found. And most of the girls that worked here found the same attitude. The people that you worked for just thought that you were just, you did everything for them, and they didn't, I don't think they appreciated you. And at that time, I was brought up to respect your elders, and anybody who was an authority, you listened to them, and that was it. And when I think back of how the gentleman, I'll call him, how he spoke to me at times, I would never tolerate that today. But I was so young, and I was doing what I was brought up to do.
What did you miss most about Ireland?
I missed the social life. I missed my family, the interaction with my sisters and brothers. I mean, we had our fights, you know,
Yeah.
arguments. And I remember my mother saying one time, one day, you guys will be so happy to see each other. We say, oh, yeah, you know, when we were having our arguments. But I do realize that was true. And we are today, to this day, very happy to see each other. But I did miss them and the social life.
Did you go back often, or were you able to go back?
Yes,
often?
I went back. At the beginning, it was harder to go back. After I first got married, it was harder. But when my daughter was 2 years of age, I went back with her. And then maybe when she was about 6, we went back. And then my parents started to come out. They would come out maybe, my mother and father both came out maybe about 4 times. And then after my mother passed away, my father started to come out every other year. He loved it. He loved it here. He used to do my gardening.
Tell us, talk a little bit about, you just mentioned you got married and your children. Why don't you talk a bit about your marriage and your kids when you got married?
I got married in 64, 65. I have one daughter, Christina. She was born in 66. And she grew up in Stratford. She went to St. James School, and then she went to St. Joseph's, and then she went to college for a year and graduated. And she's now married. She lives up in Wallingford, and I have 4 granddaughters and 1 grandson on the way.
Oh, on the way.
And we lived in Stratford most of the time. I lived in Milford for 1 year, but then we moved back to Stratford because I really liked Stratford. It was a nice little town. And
with the telephone company, you worked in Bridgeport?
I worked in Bridgeport,
yeah.
and I worked in New Haven for a little while, and I worked in Derby. But I started off as an operator, and then I became a cashier, and then a service representative. So I moved around, and I really enjoyed my years at the phone company.
31.
31. Yeah.
I actually worked with somebody that knew you and worked with you at the phone company.
Yeah.
Just retired again, Marie Fernandez.
Marie, yeah, she was great. Yeah, her mother was Irish.
Yeah, she just passed away.
Yes, yeah.
Did you become a citizen?
I did. I became a citizen in the 70s. And then I sponsored my brother, Bernard, who came out in the 70s.